If I were president, John, I would have gone very, very differently.
How would you do it? All right, Andrew Yang wins. You're president. What's your prescription?
Yeah, so the AI guys are like essentially like, hey, it's too complicated for you. Like, let us speed up and let us compete against China. And I'd be like, look, guys, here are my top 5 concerns about AI, and you have to convince me and like this battery of smart people that they're being meaningfully addressed, or else you guys don't get carte blanche.
John Avalon of the Bulwark had Andrew Yang on to talk about AI and a variety of different ways that applies to our contemporary lives and political situations. I've done another video where they talk about universal basic income. In this one, they talk about how it pertains directly to our democracy. And what to do about it, which I think is an interesting and relevant subject. So let's watch it together. I'm going to have thoughts as we go, and then I want to know what you think in the comments, but let's roll it.
The goal here, at least from my frame of mind, is how do we strengthen and stabilize our democracy at a time of massive change that is going to disaggregate a lot of folks, at least in the short term. Right? Every industrial revolution, there are winners and there are losers, but new industries are created. But this is something fundamentally different. So there should be a patriotic urgency around this. And the earning tax credit you described was put in place by Bill Clinton. The child tax credit you fought for was briefly in place. Cut childhood poverty in half, was not renewed. But one of the new things that's happened since you ran is there's an increased appreciation for the enormously regressive impacts of inflation, right? And along with a bigger problem with debt. And what I'm just curious about is how the increase in the debt and the cost of the debt and the increased awareness of the pain of inflation changes your approach to UBI. Or are you just saying, look, it's actually not an issue?
Well, this is something that deeply pains me, John, because, I run for president, COVID hits, everyone's like, oh, we have to do something. And then we printed about $6 trillion in response to COVID in the multiple relief acts. And we did send out cash relief checks, which if you do the math, the average American might have received something like $2,900 maybe along those lines ahead. Like the average American received about 17% of the $6 trillion we printed. So then what happened to the other 83%? We sent it to states, cities. We pumped up the stock market. There was a massive wealth transfer to everyone who is a shareholder because we said, oh, can't let anything happen to them. And so then people look up and say there is inflation, which there has been, and everyone blames the relief checks. And it's like, well, like, would you blame the 17% or would you blame the 83% on that one? You know what I mean? And so then like everyone's share prices continue to go up. And then inflation hit, and then the poor suffer. So it pains me deeply that everyone looks and is like, oh, money in people's hands, that was the problem. It's like, no, it wasn't really it. It was like I think it was all the other stuff we did, and here we are. And so like, by the way, the deprivation is now worse than ever. I mean, it's like you can see that. So are there things that need to be done in terms of reining in costs and like finding efficiencies in our government? 100%. Is there a lot of room, even if you're very concerned about government spending and the deficit, to do more for the neediest among us? Yeah, there's totally a lot more that we could and should do. And you point out that the enhanced child tax credit, got undone in 2022. I mean, like that was heartbreaking because that was something that we were clearly doing that was working. Kids were learning more. There were, like there was less domestic violence. Like there are all these things where you look at it and be like, oh, like that was a good thing. And there's room for good things, even with some cost consciousness.
Obviously, right? And so often the conversation is this kind of binary. It's all this way or nothing, right? All that way, and there's no conversation about the middle ground. You don't want to give the other side what's perceived as a political win. It's insane because that was clearly a very effective thing.
But you're speaking to the impulse sometimes, the phrase is often, we socialize losses and privatize profits, but the government action seems geared towards big corporations, not towards the working families, the working poor. And they're the first ones to sort of get cut. The larger danger, of course, is something, these are historical forces the founding fathers were aware of. If you've got really cavernous gaps between the richest and the poorest, that's destabilizing for society. So as you go back and you make this amended case for UBI, how do you address those critics who say, that, well, it hasn't really proved itself. And, to say, look, we have an interest in making sure that our economy works for the working poor. Otherwise, we are in deep trouble. And, my belief is we need to make sure we need to do everything we can to rebuild the strong and stable middle class. That's calling in politics.
Yeah. So in the simplest terms, John, you have a nation which either has a mindset of abundance and growth and optimism, or a mindset of scarcity and pessimism. And if someone else is doing well, then it means it came out of my pocket somehow. And I'm going to ask people listening to this, like, which do you think we're in right now? Which do you think is winning? I mean, it's clearly scarcity. And the reason it's scarcity is in large part because if you were an American born in the 1990s, there's like only a 50% chance you're going to do better than your parents, and it's declining all the time. Back when you and I were born in the 70s, that might have been an 80% chance. I mean, I'm the child of immigrants, and so it was kind of presumed I was going to do better than my parents. And it's like if I did it, it was a problem in my household. And so now, if you're the average American waking up and being like, well, never going to own a house, can't afford to get married, like no one will go on a date with me, my job hasn't given me a raise, and like my expenses, including my rent, keep creeping up and up, then you wind up with a xenophobic, pessimistic electorate that then when someone like Donald Trump comes along, it's like, all right, I guess, here we go, this is what I'm doing. Like, this guy's going to break this machine that has been keeping me down. And so the question is, how do you make it so that people don't feel like their lives are going to be worse than their parents, et cetera, et cetera? And you have to make big moves in that direction. One of the problems in my mind is that we have fallen way behind this curve. It's taken place over years and years and years. People are pissed. And so how can you address their concerns for real in a way that has them flip from scarcity to possibility? That's a lot. That's like a big leap. And one of the problems we have is that there's almost like this debt that is being built up. It makes me super sad when I see the stats around young people and, their prospects for the future. When I was running for president, I would say to young people, it's like, you should either be mad or sad, because it's true. And then if your message is like, no, you should be happy and it's their fault, like, then they'll be like, wait a minute, what? That's not like that isn't compelling, and it's not going to bring us back together.
It definitionally is not. And I should say your work as founder of the Forward Party is trying to address these gaps. And I recommend everybody, you and I can go deep on the political reforms that are absolutely necessary on this. That's actually where you and I have found a lot of common ground when we first sort of met and bonded. But zero-sum politics does not work in a democracy. And this is something this is a proper role of government to address these changes before, the narcotic grievance politics leaves everybody nowhere, and you get real, even further destabilization. These are actions that there could and should be some bipartisan common ground on, because they will address issues of stability and opportunity in a time of great transition. And it's just got to be so frustrating to have been sort of the town crier about this early on, and to see not only no action being taken, but the changes occur, and then the debt situations got worse in ways that actually make it less likely that it'll pass. But someone's got to step up and have the stones to make the case that we need this kind of change. Otherwise, there are worse things down the pike.
Poverty is the most addressable of our major problems, in my view, John. Like, poverty, we can do something about. Like some of these other things, it's like, oh, that's going to be rough. but poverty, by them numbers, it's totally addressable. There's way too much of it, and we all end up paying for it. When there's some poor kid who does not get educated or isn't in the right environment or whatnot, they wind up homeless, they wind up addicted to drugs, they wind up in our criminal justice system, and then it becomes incredibly expensive. Our healthcare system, they wind up in an ER as primary care, incredibly expensive. Like, we all pay. It's one of those things where if you make an investment early, like, it pays enormous dividends. And I think
Excellent point. It gets framed as this moral thing, like, well, they should pull themselves up by their bootstraps, or how, well, if they don't like being poor, then they shouldn't have been poor. But it's also, it's economic good sense too.
People know that in their own lives. I mean, like, you and I are parents. It's like we do. And one of the reasons I ran for office was that I became a parent and I saw what was happening in our family, and then I saw what was happening in other families, and I was like, this is, we can do better than this. I've been very, very saddened by what's happened over this last number of years. Genuinely, it's like as a guy who did raise my hand and be like, hey guys, AI is coming, and be like, hey, like, isn't that interesting? Like, and it's like, well, here it is, and and I do think that our political culture has been eroding in part because we've let these trends have people sink into like an air of dubiousness and skepticism about a whole host of institutions, including our media. And it's been building over a period of time. It's very hard to rebuild trust after you've lost it.
So let's talk about rebuilding trust and impact on the media, particularly with regard to AI. This is a big topic, but what's your broad-based policy solution for combating the flood of disinformation that could come from AI, where the cost of producing bullshit is zero?
Bullshit cheap. Congratulations, everyone. We've done it. John, it's one reason why I'm very glad to join you in this kind of context is that the solution is people. And there are various people that other Americans look to and be like, hey, I think most everyone's full of shit. But you know who I actually listen to? That person. And so you have to try and bring together a diverse tribe of those people to say, we might not agree on everything, but we can agree on these things. And then you have at least a fighting chance. The backdrop that makes all of this much, much harder is this completely unrepresentative two-party system where everyone feels like there's this invisible line and you have to be on one side or the other. And it's only after you get beyond that could you potentially bring together a critical mass of human beings with diverse followings. And I'm going to single out one group that I think is very, very disproportionately influential in this area. And some people are going to hate this, but whatever. It's comedians. Like the comedians completely transcend party lines, and like there's certain people. Like if you look at some of the fans of these comedians, they love that comedian. They hang on there every word. They will show up to everything they do. Anyway, I'll stop there so you can fill in some names yourself. But like that to me is how you potentially try and get your way out of this. But I don't have any illusions about this. And one thing's it's like we're losing. I mean, everyone should know. It's like reality is losing. Like good guys are losing. Like whatever it is. Like like everyone's taking a big L because there have been these like mega trends that have been building around disintegration of trust and a bunch of other things. And so it's like you and I naturally are like, how do we rebuild trust? Because we're like positive guys. We want to have good things happen for people. But it's a dark time.
Look, but for all the macro trends that are frustrating and discouraging by any objective measure, the one thing history tells us really clearly is that the people who curl up in a fetal position.
That's not our jam, John. I know.
No.
We're going to be the rebuilder, rekindlers. I mean, heck,
absolutely.
That's what this pod is, how to fix it. And you can certainly count Andrew Yang in the Mr. Fix-It ranks. But I do want to
you're always safest when you confront reality, but you need to do it with a sense of defiant optimism, and then propose a practical plan and show where there can be some common ground that we can find, because it does exist. It's just you got to push back against the zero sum of it all.
It's rally the diverse humans across party lines. That's my my solution on it, and it is doable. You're right, and there are great people on quote unquote both sides of the aisle. I hate even to say that because
it sounds so both sides. But the reality is we have to find ways to form broad coalitions, and that's what the Forward Party, which you founded, is dedicated to. But before we go, look, one of the challenges, the macro challenge between democracy and autocracies always say, this was true in the 30s, that democracy is inefficient and that they can move more quickly.
Yeah, and we're hearing this now with Elon Musk and his Doge going in and just ripping out wires under the hood, and shutting down whole systems. And they're like, well, look, guys, the bureaucracy, this will never get fixed if we just don't, send one lean team in there with a sharp sword to like carve it all out. We can always just put it back. If there's a good thing, we can put it back. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. You wouldn't do that with your car.
When you have the challenge of something as fast-moving as AI, the way our legislation moves, it's going to be tough to keep up. So what is this idea of layered oversight to AI? How can that be not, subject to regulatory capture, but how do you think AI can be regulated in a way that actually just creates clear rules of the road and guidelines so it doesn't turn into the zero-sum, us versus them, Manichaean politics?
And you're citing my friend Gary Marcus, who is an AI expert and very positive. And one of the things that tech companies resist is like, do you really trust government to regulate this thing? And one of the things I proposed when I was running for president was that you should have a world data organization where different countries come together and have just rules of how our data gets treated. And I will be honest, I mean, you have like a US versus China competition. Mm-hmm. And so it really was who could get Europe on board. And then if you have the West, then it's who can get Latin America and Africa on board, and and then you try and create an equivalent of a WTO for data. You have some international guidelines, then you have federal. One of the things I'm very excited about, honestly, is like to the extent that there could be some leadership in this space, some of the states really do have a shot at it. And if you do something, what's fascinating is the tech companies are like, oh my gosh, I have to comply with what in Illinois? And in Illinois, there's a real thing, by the way. There was like a data rights case in Illinois, and I think Meta had to pay everyone. So that there are real actors out there, and this is one of the hopes. And then the last stand, which by the way I think is for the most part downright nonsense. It is like the industry, the consortium, the self-regulation, like generally speaking, they won't do anything that really hurts themselves. but they can be brought to the table if the legislation is their alternative.
And this is what government is for. Look, there are a lot of leaders in AI at least say that they want regulation. They just want it to be, tech forward and not, sort of a playing defense, but in a way that hobbles our ability to compete as this rolls out. Look, this is a topic that would be more urgent.
If I were president, John, I would have gone very, very differently.
How would you do it? All right, Andrew Yang wins. You're president. What's your prescription?
Yeah, so the AI guys are like essentially like, hey, it's too complicated for you. Like, let us speed up and let us compete against China. And I'd be like, look, guys, here are my top 5 concerns about AI, and you have to convince me and this battery of smart people that they're being meaningfully addressed, or else you guys don't get carte blanche. So number 1 would be rampant identity theft. 2 would be splintering of the American consciousness in the media and social media landscape. Number 3 is it falling into the hands of bad actors who could use it asymmetrically. Number 4 is displacement of workers. Like, you could reverse that and make that number 1. I can just be like, start with displacement, of workers. And then number 5 would be like that there are certain people that are going to be like beneficiaries and other people that are left out in the cold. And like, what does that look like? Independent of jobs, like that, just from like the value and the accrual and like the, like you have to make the case to the random person in Iowa that's going to be good for you. And so, and the tech companies, would be like, nah, don't worry about it. And then you'd have to say no, like, unless you can actually convince us that these 5 things are being addressed, then, you don't get the green light. And then they'd be like, but our share prices aren't going to be as high and like a bunch of other things. We have to like make all this money. And it's like, that's not my problem. Like, I'm the president. They elected me to look out for them. So, if we're going to like, blow their media landscape to smithereens and like have them be concerned that every time they get a call from their mom, it's an AI deepfake trying to spoof them out of their money, or like, whatever the host of problems is, like, how are you addressing that? Because, you've got hundreds of billions of dollars in profit on the line. I can see that very clearly. but there are these negative externalities, like the asymmetrical thing. It's like, one of my friends, Tristan Harris, found that you could use AI to find out how to build a bioweapon. It's like, like bully for someone who wants to make a bioweapon, but like that's not exactly like, it's like something we want. So that there were these and that's leadership. The problem is that we have a political system where you have a leader who's like, I don't understand this stuff, like what's going on. You know what I'll do? And this I didn't hate, it's fine. It's like, I'm going to issue an executive order telling all my agencies to like look really hard at this and do things that will be good for us. And then the tech companies were like, okay, it's like that's not going to hold me back. That's not going to. So, like I would have, I would have had head-to-head convos with Sam and Zuck and Bezos and all these guys and been like, look, guys, like, all right, let's be real, and you're not going to snow us. So it does pain me, John. It's like, I'm not someone, me, like I'm not someone who goes to sleep being like, you mean I'm not president? Like I'm not that sort of person. But some of the things I see out there, I'm just like, damn, I would have done things differently.
Well, of course you would. And this also gets to issues like the average age of Congress. You can't have leaders that don't understand the technology that's transforming the landscape. You also need to have guardrails in place so that short-term share price is not actually the marker of societal success. It's actually, making sure that we're harnessing this massive change in a way that makes America the most competitive, country in the world, which we are because of our natural economic ingenuity, but make sure that change is working for everybody and that we're not ashamed to talk about the common good as well as common ground. That those are things that used to be guide stars, they need to be again, and that's the opposite of a zero-sum approach to politics and the economy.
When I talk about the winners and losers, John, it's like we're entering a world where certain people will never get a job interview because AI like dings certain things about their profile, and like that's like where we're heading. That was like my, concern number 5. It's like essentially like companies will just start using an AI screen for everything, and then if you run afoul of one screen, you're probably going to run afoul of all the other screens too. And so it's like, I'm permanently on the outside looking in. Like that. I mean, that's the kind of dystopia we're fast approaching. Sorry, I keep being a downer on this stuff.
No, look, I think there's about being a realist who's determined to create a better future. That's what we're about, and the whole idea is defending the idea of government of, for, and by the people.
It's an interesting conversation. I do think it is important to remember that we have to stay optimistic. By all means, look at this incredible situation, this crazy, dire situation that we face with open eyes, and we have to look at it clear-eyed, and we have to be realistic about the problems we have to surmount. But we can't curl up, as he says, into a ball and give up, because That's just not an option. Let me know what you think in the comments.